We'll give it just another minute before we really ramp up, but we'll start by just saying welcome, everyone. We're really pleased to have you with us for today's webinar. This is the 3D Printing Leadership Forum, How to Fill Auto Manufacturing Supply Chain Gaps During COVID-19 and Beyond. The automotive industry has taken a big hit during COVID-19 with factory closures, supply chain disruptions, and declining demand. How can automotive manufacturers build resilience into their supply chains, become more agile, and overcome these challenges now in the future? We're here today with three wonderful experts to discuss these and many other options and parts of conversation. We'll obviously be focusing a lot on 3D printing and digital tools and technologies in these things. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us from several time zones and continents, including our panelists who are dispersed in, I think Avi and I are the only ones in the same country. So we've got a couple of continents just among those of us presenting today and also with you all joining us. So welcome everyone, I'm Sara Goerke. I've been a journalist dedicated to the 3D printing industry since 2014, and now I own and operate Additive Integrity, an AM-focused editorial services company through which I work with Fabaloo and other clients in media and the industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, 3D Printing Leadership Forum, How to Fill Auto Manufacturing Supply Chain Gaps During COVID-19 and Beyond, and moderate the conversation with Avi Reichental, Hugo De Silva, and Jerry McQuaid. I'm going to ask each of our panelists today to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Avi.
Good morning or good evening, everybody, and welcome again to our 3D Printing Leadership Forum. It's good to be here. I'm Avi Reichental. I am the founder of Exponential Works and the co-founder and CEO of Nexa3D. A company that is absolutely passionate about democratizing 3D printing at scale for production applications. And it's a real pleasure to be here.
Wonderful, thank you. Hugo, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be in a panel with such, let's say, knowledgeable people. I'm leading the 3D printing business unit at DSM. So DSM is a material science company active in health and materials. We are present in 3D printing for about 25 years as a company. We actually were one of the first materials companies, and actually the first material to be printed in one of the first machines in the world. I'm in DSM about 3 years. Prior to DSM, I worked for Dow, and prior to Dow to Philips, and I'm involved with 3D printing a little bit over than 7 years, and heavily involved in automotive, electronics, and many other markets for about 20 years.
Wonderful, thank you, Hugo. And Jerry, will you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Kubik Telecom. We are a software company which specializes in enabling global manufacturers to efficiently build and sell devices that need to be connected in any of the global markets that they operate in. We serve a small subset of markets, but our most important market is the global automotive industry, and the devices in question are cars. We supply software applications and management systems that enable cars to be connected for a variety of purposes, such as safety, cost efficiency for the owner, autonomous driving, real-time information for the owner and for the manufacturer, and in-car entertainment. They're just examples. And in this way, we are part of the automotive supply chain, but our product in this case consists of software and the processing of billions of data points every day. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, now that you know who we're talking with, today let's talk about what we're talking about. Avi, Hugo, and Jerry will be speaking about the latest uncertainties as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact both people and businesses around the world. While many conversations are focusing on how to impact care, we're looking primarily today at the impact on business. These men all have great experience in leadership and, importantly, in supply chain understanding, so we'll turn these experiences to actionable takeaways for the 3D printing community today, and especially the automotive community and industry. This conversation will be about 45 minutes long, and we want it to really be a conversation. Please feel free to submit questions throughout in the Q&A form you see down at the bottom of your screen. I'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A box throughout, and anything that comes up that's particularly pertinent to one of the points that the panelists are discussing, we can pop in with then. But we're also dedicating time at the end of the conversation to dive right into these questions in a dedicated Q&A. We might not be able to tackle all of them. There are a lot of you and only a few of us in limited time, but we'll do our best to address all of the main issues. I might be calling on some of you to ask your own questions, and I'll be unmuting your mic. I'll ask you in the chat before doing so to make sure that you're good, kind of speaking up to voice your own question, and you can ask the panelists yourself. Otherwise, I'll be reading them for you. Put your questions in the Q&A box at any time throughout the presentation. And this presentation will also be available as a recording after today's broadcast. So with that, that's a lot of intro and housekeeping. Let's get into this. So panelists, here we go. Our first topic is, even before the pandemic hit, the automotive industry has long been evolving to adapt to new technologies. How have you seen some of these impacts prepare automotive companies to also become more software and adaptive companies rather than pure hardware? Why don't we kick that off with Jerry, actually?
Okay, that's a very good point, because I know there's a lot of focus on the disruption caused by the pandemic to the automotive industry, along with other major industries. But I think it's important to keep in mind that the automotive industry was going through quite radical change before any pandemic hit, and in fact has been dealing with very significant challenges in that process. So they will just resume as the lockdowns are relaxed. Cars, companies have been building cars for over 100 years, but the next 100 years are going to be radically different. Consumers will care less about the, things like the performance of the car, which is very traditional buying criterion for cars, and more about the software applications and the experience that they will have with the car. So the car will become more like it's rapidly becoming a digital device. So over the next 10 years or so, the most important source of value, because I know we're talking about supply chain here, in the automotive supply chain is actually going to shift from car parts and engines. Instead, the most important source of value is going to move towards a network of software developers. And you will hear the leadership of car companies talking about transitioning their companies into becoming software companies.
Yeah, I think, Jerry, that you're right, that the automotive space has been probably most impacted from the convergence of many exponential technologies like ubiquitous connectivity, infinite computing, power in the cloud, the introduction of AI and machine learning and sensing into the vehicle to make it increasingly more autonomous. And it's also impacting not only who's going to build cars, now that we're going from kind of an ICE architecture to an EV architecture, but also what's going to happen to car ownership and all the disruption that comes from that. There is no question that for suppliers and stakeholders in this industry, like the three of us, this typically also spells opportunities because the auto industry inevitably will have to go through faster cycles of commercialization. They will have to reinvent their monetization platform. They will have to completely rethink their design agility and supply chain resiliency, including customization and personalization within the vehicle. And all of that, I think, speaks and shapes and informs opportunities to digitize connectivity and usability or utility of the car, but also to completely digitize the end-to-end design and manufacturing for that kind of agility.
Great points. And I also like to add, I think even if you think about the whole development of a car, and I heard the other day in a seminar that a electrical car, so as an example, Tesla, they would start the development from a software perspective and then build a hardware around. Traditionally, the industry would build a hardware and try to fix the software later. I think if you really think that, not saying what's right and wrong, but you can imagine that those are the opposite approaches, how you would start your designing and designing criteria. And if you think about electrical cars that are rapidly dominate, you can also think about other types of development, because lightweight might be more important than the power in your engine, like you're just mentioning, Gary. And when you think about lightweight, you need to think about how to smartly design your car. And if you think about, like Avi was mentioning about customization, I think we are in a world of highly customized everything. So think about our phones, think about your car, think about even your sneaker when you buy in the shop, so you can even customize color and pick all kinds of things. And this is also coming to the car industry, where traditionally the car, I remember in the past, the car was built to be working for 30 to 50 years. It was like for life. It's almost like your house. And if you think about all software gadgets in the car, almost like a device, you start to think about a car to be used for 2 or 3 years and probably it needs an upgrade. And then there are other things that kicks in, like sustainability. So I think that my point is really about how you think about designing, what are the tools that are available to design, and be very flexible to do that. And I think this poses a major challenge to the industry that is in the past was well known to be very traditional. I think that it's going to be a lot of opportunities, I would say, and probably a lot of fun how to design the car in the future. And like Avi was saying, also about the ownership, I'm not sure if my kids will own a car. So to be seen, right? So, but that's for sure changed the way you design, the way you manufacture, and the way you own a car, which is a lot of change coming up that everybody working in innovation like us, you would feel very excited to be in.
Yeah, just to back that up, I think the classic for people who are selling into the automotive industry, the sales cycle is very long. You know, it's typically 2 or 3 years, because you're actually trying to hit a launch of a car model or a range of cars 3 years down the road, or if not longer. That's all going to change. The cycle of introducing new models with new features, new devices, if you like, is going to speed up. And that's being enabled by the digitizing the entire process, you know, the manufacturing process. And you guys are expert in, you know, the 3D printing technologies and robotics. I come from the software side and the connectivity side, but it's the digitizing of the entire process, and the suppliers to the industry need to learn a new sales cycle as well as the manufacturers learning a new development cycle, very akin to digital devices that we would be familiar with, that consumers use all the time.
Yeah, and in fact, Jerry, you're absolutely right when you stop to think about the paradigm shift from a classic ICE architecture, the internal combustion engine, going to an EV, and the kind of skateboard drivetrain, which already consolidates thousands of parts into, in essence, a base that gives you the drivetrain. All of a sudden, the actual making of a vehicle or a transport capsule, you know, with different utilities, whether it's first mile, last mile, or the capsule that carries you as your mobile office and the services space, becomes a packaging exercise. The barriers to entry are shrinking. The business model combinations are expanding. The utility of this device, you know, becomes more like you said, a cell phone on wheels, and it becomes more about a new design thinking across the board, both in terms of the role of suppliers, packagers, developers, service providers, and of course, the suppliers that will provide the digital content, the material content, and the functionality of the production components and their utilities. So I think it's probably one of the most exciting periods in kind of reimagining transportation and mobility, but it's going to create a lot of disruption.
And as part of that disruption, sorry, Hugo, I'm going to disrupt you a little bit, because we just had 2 questions come in while we're on the topic of this customizing going on in the automotive industry that I think are really relevant to where we are in the conversation right now. So these 2 questions kind of piggyback on each other very nicely, asking, do you think 3D printing could decrease the cost of customizable cars, or does it not matter? As well as, how will this affect the prices of the car for customers? So we just have questions about how these are going to be, you know, impacting that bottom line through just this customization aspect.
I can start answering that question with kind of like a dream/vision here. So I would love, so in the future, to go to a dealer and order a car with all kinds of different things and get my car right away or a day later. I think the cost of the opportunity of doing that, it's very interesting, and maybe 3D printing could enable that. So you can imagine a car being 55 or 75% done by a factory, and the dealer could print parts on the go and then put those parts, the highly customized parts. On the other hand, there is a highly cost. So every time you go to a car manufacturer, and I've been involved in several large projects, or you can see, obviously you don't think about the car, which is the highest volume and the number one model of this car, but you have, every time you down customize it, you have one tool being used to make a few parts, and you have a spare tool. And then you also takes long time to do the whole development of the car. So if you're thinking about every car needs to be renewed every X amount of years, and you need to create certain amount of options, you need to procure several parts. I do believe the additive manufacturing together with digital tools could enable lower costs in the long run. I do believe that, and that would deliver something the customers were looking for. When you just buy a phone, you can just get an app, and you just add app on your phone right away. So it's the ultimate customization on timing. And I do believe digital tools together with additive can really enable that. Shorter development time and customize on the go, very close to where the customers are. So allowing local for local, as people call.
Yeah, I could add to what Hugo said. I think that there are a few areas where, call it generative design and additive manufacturing can play an important role in cost. One is in taking weight out of the vehicle. As you know, lightweighting is already a major imperative in automotive. And I think that the low-hanging fruit have already taken off the table. That was called material substitutions. So the opportunity to apply more innovative human and machine learning into it and take more weight out of the vehicle and combine parts could render generative and additive technologies very cost effective, because we shouldn't think here just in terms of one-for-one substitution of a certain existing geometry in injection molding or in casting into an additive. There is an opportunity here to capitalize on the fact that complexity is free and performance can be enhanced from lightweighting and combination. The other interesting aspect here, I think, to Hugo's point is that, and we learned this all during COVID, there is a certain elegance and simplicity to nearshoring or onshoring and even hyper-localizing supply chain by making it more distributed and on demand. And I think that that also introduces another very attractive theme and an important one, which is sustainability. And you know, as vehicles in and of themselves become more sustainable, the whole design thinking and the physical deployment of manufacturing in a digital world could become much, much more sustainable. And I think that's something worth pursuing.
Yeah, we have one of our customers on that sustainability point. It's a very good point. The cycle of turning around new cars is enabled by the technologies that you've been describing. But this company, it's called Arrival. It's a UK-based electric vehicle company, and they've actually gone all the way back to change even the materials. They haven't just assumed that the traditional normal materials used in the manufacture of a car will continue, and they've replaced the aluminium content with a brand new material that they've invented themselves. So they haven't just relied on sourcing standard materials. This is reducing the need for mining, mining of aluminium, and the car itself is very strong, but also very light, to reinforce that point that you made there, Avi and Hugo.
Perfect. Well, we've seen that all of these technologies, these new digital tools, including additive manufacturing, have been using and rising in use in the automotive manufacturing industry for several years now, and especially in what now people are calling the before times, pre-COVID-19. How do we think that additive manufacturing and digital tools will be used differently within the industry after the pandemic ends? How is the pandemic reshaping the use and need for digitization within automotive?
Hugo, you want to take that first?
I can get started. Well, so the way I see, so we've been actually working really hard to deploy digital tools before pandemic. And a lot of those digital tools will be very helpful to accelerate developments, to accelerate testing. I think one of the questions I would love to hear from the audience, if you have people working automotive, when you have a shorter cycle time of products, you can imagine that it's going to be really hard to have a 10,000 hour testing. And I know in automotive, you do a lot of 10,000 hour testing, 85 cycles. So if you add a bunch of these testing in millions of components, it makes very difficult to develop any product in a few months time frame. So I think the tools, what my biggest learning now by using digital tools, and we are heavily involved in several COVID projects, by having powerful simulation tools like generative design, prediction of properties before you even print something, or even everything you can work from a digital before you get into physical, you can shorten up development time dramatically. And if you do that, I think we were able to start printing nasal swabs. We were able to make masks in a record turnaround. We had projects in DSM that would take a year and took a few weeks. And I'm sure everyone in 3D printing are experiencing that. In fact, that's how you see the shining of 3D printing into this whole crisis, because we were able to think a lot of things along with digital before you even get a product. But you can predict, you can test, you can do a lot of things before you even have a physical product. And that speeds things up dramatically. And I think in the times like we are right now, or you see big swings and changes in the so-called VUCA world that is changing almost in every day, having powerful digital tools where we can plan, simulate, testing, everything in a digital quite fast. I mean, some of the softwares are amazing. You can do 10,000 tests in a few minutes, which is unbelievable. So instead of doing 10 or 100, 10,000 hour testing, maybe you do one and you create a model and you can model that. So I think that's for me, the biggest learning is that how can we enable even more digital tools, and the digital tools will translate that to a digital file that you can then print and make it physical much faster than before. That's for me the biggest impact, and I hope that all the industry around us can see how powerful that is and can help us scaling up. Now, the challenge for me will be how we scale that up. How can we have more users? How can we go faster? I will make an analogy. I think Google, or which is one of the key enablers in digital, I mean, they're just big because they have many users. So more people using those tools, I think the adoption in 3D printing or digital tools will be bigger, and then it'll be more cost effective and more effective.
Yeah, there is no question in my mind that every automaker in the entire ecosystem, the tiers and the suppliers and the developers are going to take a hard look first at where can digital design, simulation, and digital fabrication can come in, because I think it lends itself extremely well to post-COVID future of work kind of issues. How do we de-densify facilities and factories, and how do we use digital tools and connectivity and software across the board, starting with intelligent design and simulation and compressed design cycles. I think that there's also a real opportunity here to think about how do you begin to deal with immediate supply chain fragility and brittleness based on the actual COVID experiences, and how do you begin to divide or catalog what could become part of your post-COVID digital inventory of CAD files that could be easily manufactured using additive or hybrid technologies today. That's part of the answer. The smarter answer is to begin to apply the design thinking to next generation vehicles that also take into consideration how to take today's generative design simulation tools and material performance and unlock the material performance as it is today through more intelligent designs. That fusion of software, material science, and optimized structures can actually advance the utility of 3D printing technologies quite a bit in the here and now if we apply that kind of design thinking to it.
Perfect. And we've had another question come in that also fits nicely with where we are right now. Will COVID-19 impact attitudes towards 3D printing in automotive industry? Will it help in recovering the gap of the broken supply chain? How are we feeling about, how people are feeling about 3D printing now that the technology's kind of been in the spotlight for supply chain solutions?
I can start answering that because it's we do have a lot of customers in automotive, and I see a mixed feeling right now, being very honest. I think from one side, a lot of the innovation projects that they were running got deprioritized because there is a very big concern. Well, make sure the factories are open, make sure they are safe and healthy employees. I think this has been, I think everybody's trying to ramp up it back on them. But on the other hand, it brought them a lot of a challenge in supply chain. And I can even speak outside automotive, and where we have our own factories, it brought a really big challenge. You can imagine something really basic as jigs and fixture. How you keep your factory open by, if you don't have that, you need to stop a production. So something very simple, you start to see if you would have a printer at somewhere in your lab, that would solve your problem. A lot of your suppliers that might not be as close as they would if you would have a 3D printing network. It also poses a lot of challenges because when you're back on track, then several suppliers around the globe cannot ship parts to you. So I would say, in one hand, there is a lot of innovation, like we're talking about software design, and then on the other side, a lot of supply chain challenge. And I think a lot of them coming back on track. I still don't know the answer, whether after COVID, we will have a really big acceleration as the learnings we had, or on the other hand, they will be recovering from a big hit. But I would like to hear also the opinion of the other panelists, how they would see this dilemma moving forward.
I think an important point is that if you take the world's biggest household names, the biggest manufacturers who are very famous for building very attractive and safe cars and reliable cars and well-designed cars. They've been doing this for a long time. They've refined their traditional processes. They need time to introduce the newer technologies, the digitized technologies that we're talking about, because they have large numbers of people building cars that people still want. So there will be a transition period. This isn't going to be like a flick of a switch. And I think the efficiencies in the supply chain that you started to talk about is one step where, instead of relying on supply of components from different parts of the world to a manufacturing facility, using the 3D printing technology to reduce that dependency is definitely a step. But it's a step that enhances what they're already doing, rather than a complete revolutionary change to the new digital car.
Yeah, if I may add to this, I think that we should consider a few things. One is, there is no question that 3D printing and digital fabrication in general got an incredible validation during COVID. It was the only community that was able to literally overnight globally respond, showcase the power of distributed devices that can output physical products as close to the marketplace as necessary, but also very forcefully exhibited the power of crowdsource innovation that knows no boundaries, of ubiquitous connectivity, where you can think about one idea in the morning in Prague and have it by evening in Pittsburgh, coming out of a printer. All those possibilities and capabilities and technologies, I think, had an opportunity to be validated at scale around the world, in a boundaryless fashion, convincingly. That is not going to go ignored by the auto industry, because within the auto industry, we have some of the early adopters and some of the largest adopters of additive manufacturing over the last few decades. They're not novices or newcomers. They understand the power of it. Because many of these technologies have been already successfully deployed for factory jigs, fixtures, gauges, at scale in companies like Volkswagen and others. And also because they also deployed it in some high-end automobiles for serial production, and even with the Mini Cooper for personalization. So they get it. The question now is, how does one manage the tyranny of the urgent, which is all of the post-COVID disruption on top of an industry that is redefining itself in general, like Jerry mentioned in the beginning, and which projects does one pick, and whether or not it will come from the core of the industry, the big players, or will it come from newcomers that will disrupt the industry because they're not saddled with all of the legacy design thinking and factory investments in the same way, metaphorically, that Tesla disrupted the industry with EVs. If I was a guessing man, I would say it's more likely than not that this kind of disruptive design thinking will probably come from the fringes, in the same way that Local Motors is thinking about 3D printing vehicles, and maybe less so in the way that one of the more established companies will think about it, just because of the risk, reward, and associated investments.
And I would like to add one thing, would be a sort of a challenge to the industry as well, because I do think that now it's a time for what we were discussing before about digital tools. If you rethink the way you design a car, and you say, rather, I don't know how many parts in a car, but let's say a car would average 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 parts. I mean, digital tools would enable this car maybe to have hundreds of parts rather than thousands of parts. And I think if you start thinking that way, and then you add the sustainability, you can also add designs that will be by default more sustainable. So you don't have to fix the problem later, because now what I see also the challenge on the cost, which often people would see in 3D printing, is that the design was meant to be 5 years ago without any 3D printing part. And then, well, let's solve a problem for 1 or 2 parts and 3D print them, rather than design the whole car thinking about a concept. Or you would print, I forgot the name of the company, where they print the whole chassis of the car in a metal printing. That's amazing, actually. You can replace maybe hundreds or 500 parts in one build. So when you start thinking that way, and you can also think about the sustainability, oh, I'm going to print in a way that I use less material, that I have a lightweight car, so the emission will be lower. So, but it's a very different way of designing. And there is already a set of tools, or many tools available, that would enable the engineers to use those. And I hope that the COVID time, it's an extra motivation, because you can gain a lot from that side. You can gain on supply chain. I think there's a lot of win-win situations. But I agree with you, Avi. Most likely the newcomers and will be the ones taking the leap on disruption, because they have less to lose and they can move a little faster, like usually happens in many of the industries.
But is it not also possible that the more luxury end of the market, I'll just pick one brand, Porsche, as a fantastic brand. So they don't make as many cars as a high volume manufacturer, but there's a very big requirement for customized models or customized purchases. And of course, those parts aren't in abundance. So it would make sense for a car, or a company like Porsche, to use 3D printing as a mechanism to replace those parts and to produce custom tools for the manufacturing process, which a manufacturer of high volume cars may not see the same business case.
Yeah.
Those are great points, and I think that moves us really nicely into some individual discussion points that we have for each of you. So we'll start with Avi while we're on the topic of specific use cases. Avi, can you tell us what some of the advantages Arcimoto has gained in making its fun utility vehicle with lightweight parts using a combination of AI and 3D printing?
Absolutely. So in the case of our Kimoto, this is a two passenger, very slim and narrow. They call it a fun utility vehicle, a FAV. And the question was, can we reduce it by a few hundred pounds? And the only way that we knew how to do that is to apply the combination of generative design for lightweighting and 3D printing to some of the heavy undercarriage parts in swing arm and some of the suspension. And we very quickly discovered that it would not make sense to 3D print the bigger parts, but that 3D printing could be the enabler for actually doing investment castings of some of the bigger parts. So the advantage was putting the FAV on a diet and making it lighter, more sustainable, combining dozens of parts into unified assemblies, 3D printing some of them in direct metal printers, and the rest basically printing some patterns on an Nexa3D printer and rushing them next door to the foundry to begin the investment casting process, which allows you to scale very rapidly and very cost effectively. What's the net? You can get a longer range on a single charge. It's good for the environment. It's good for your electrical bill. It gives you a more agile and higher performance experience as a driver. And at the end of the day, it shows the power of digital design and fabrication because we did the entire exercise in less than 30 days. So when you think about, to Hugo's point, how quickly you can completely rethink design and manufacturing, think days and weeks instead of months and years. And the net result is a vastly simplified and more local and integrated supply chain in which your circle of control increases quite a bit.
Great, and while we're looking at that supply chain circle of control, Hugo, we've got a question for you in here. If you could speak up to how ready 3D printing is from a materials perspective for this industry, this technology to really step up as a supply chain leader in the automotive industry?
Well, I think we've been in a journey, like I said, over the last 20 to 25 years. There was a set of materials, and what you can see happening over the last 3 years, it is probably more than double the materials we had over the last 20. I think there is a dramatic change, but also it really relies on OEMs, and not only in this industry, but many industries, to change the way of how to test material, how to validate properties. Again, heavily using digital tools. We have cases where you can you can create 10 materials, but test only 2, and then you can find 8 materials in between digitally. Let's call it like this, right? So this would enable more and more materials to be available. And where we are today, I think there is it's still a long journey. I would say the number of materials available in 3D printing today is probably less than 5% compared to injection molding. But there's also a question that I challenge back: do we need the same amount of materials in injection molding? I think the way I see, there is a triangle, let's say design, materials, and printing processing. You can bend, so the 3D printing, actually everything can happen digitally. So we can have these 3 dials, and we can play with these 3 dials, and that maybe 1 or 2 materials will get us 10 or 20 materials if I would put in the same comparable basis compared to injection molding, because I can do a lot more with the design. Like Avi was saying, in the generative design, when injection molding, usually you have to respect thin and thicker walls, as an example. You need to respect injection points. You need to respect a lot of rules. Let's say in 3D printing, there are no rules. Well, in between brackets, right? Obviously there are rules, but there are less rules. So with less materials, I can do a lot more. And I can start learning digitally what's the best fit between material and design. And then you match that with printing process. So you start to get, suddenly you don't need to make 1,000 materials, but you can do 5,000 applications with 100 materials. So that's what we are gearing towards. So we are investing heavily in DSM and digital tools, and I see a lot of the other major material companies doing exactly the same. Rather than hurry up to launch thousands of materials, we are trying to hurry up to enable thousands of applications with same materials by bending design and printing process. That's the way I see the future coming, and that's how we can really accelerate, let's say, the number of material application combinations in the market.
It's a really great point, Hugo. Thank you. And Jerry, when we look at the kind of overall structure of supply chain connectivity and all of that, how has Kubik been doing, I guess? What disruptions have been caused by COVID-19 to Kubik's supply chain of software and connectivity management? And how do you see the supply chain for the products and services you supply? How do you see that changing over the coming years?
Well, I think one area we didn't really explore so far in this discussion is what happens after the car is sold. We've talked a lot about the design and the manufacturing process. For the automotive manufacturer, the feedback loop of what happens with a car after it goes into the market is really important. And that is becoming even more important in terms of informing what changes they need to make in their own designs and in the technologies that they're using. So our role is to provide the connectivity management and the software to enable any car that's sold by a global manufacturer to be connected to a very powerful analytics system that provides the feedback to the engineers and the designers on an array of components and parts, how the car is actually performing as a complete unit, but also how individual components are performing, and in fact how cars are being driven. That data is in the billions of data points every day, and it needs to be analyzed and processed. But the cars can be anywhere. They can be in North America, Asia, Africa, Central Europe. But somebody somewhere has to worry about what changes they want to make. It could be major technological change, or it could be a component change or a material change. So that part of the overall supply chain is a very important part that we play in. The feedback loop of providing that robust and reliable connectivity and the information back to the people who need it, very often in real time, but also in aggregate form. In terms of your question about how did the pandemic impact us, it has impacted us because a significant proportion of our revenue comes from cars actually driving around. So when the lockdowns kicked in, where people were confined to their homes, cars were stuck in the garage or outside the house and weren't moving. So we weren't processing any data. So it did actually impact a proportion of our revenue for about 10 weeks. And we had to, we had to brainstorm that in terms of how long is this going to go on? How serious is it going to become? Will there be a second peak? All those sorts of questions that everybody's been asking. We had to take some contingency measures just in case. I'm pleased to say that the cars moving have recovered almost back to where they were in January. I think part of that is because people aren't flying as much or using public transport as much and are using cars and using their own cars. So I don't know, does that explain our role and where we fit?
I think that's great, Jerry. Thank you. All right, gentlemen, those were all some really great points and we appreciate them. We've got several questions coming in from our attendees today, if you're up for some good Q&A. We've got a really interesting one, I think, that says, do you see cultural differences or differences between countries in the way they're looking into 3D printing? So different cultures, different markets, how are we looking at the adoption of 3D printing in the automotive industry around the world? And actually works that everyone here is in a different country. So we've already got some multinational perspective.
Yeah.
Jerry, sorry, Avi, why don't you?
No, go ahead.
I couldn't really talk about cultural differences in relation to 3D printing itself, but there's certainly cultural differences in relation to the environmental impact and sustainability. It's quite diverse depending on which part of the world we focus on. There's also cultural differences in terms of how much content and services should be provided in the car as a complete digital experience. In Asia, for example, it's much more about the reliability and the measurement of making the car as comfortable and safe as possible, and the information that ensures that that is happening. Whereas in Europe, there's a very big focus on what's called infotainment, which is making the car a complete, rich experience for the consumer. But in all cases, the manufacturers need the data. They're very, very anxious to get real-time information. With the latest cars, you mentioned Tesla, the amount of data that they're processing is huge every day. There are many sensors, and the feedback that the manufacturer requires is really important in terms of how they can progress and advance. So I think the requirement for the data is common across the regions in terms of cultural differences. I think sustainability is probably the biggest differentiator.
I have one thing to add, which is probably related to other industries. I think in different regions, there is a different perception, how you see the car as a device, as a car, and what do you want to do with that, and how long do you want to drive that car. I think I start to see, even I'll put myself as an example, where I had a lot more passion to drive a car and a real gas car. But when you drive an electrical car, I think your passion is slightly different, and you start to think more about the environment. And there are other things around you that influence you, like your kids, like people around you. I think I see those changes, and usually it depends on the region. I see, for instance, in Asia, it looks like, especially in China, people are able to change that perception much faster than in Europe, as an example. I start to see that. So if you have a car that will be lasting longer, but you have a great experiences, it probably, you can see in some regions that adoption will be higher than in others, where people has an expectation that the car is almost like their home. It should stay there for 30 years. But I see this perception rapidly change, because obviously all the electronic devices around us are enabling that change. It's almost like if you buy your phone now, your phone operator will charge X dollar per month, and then you get the phone for 2 years. After 2 years, it's almost a crime if you don't change your phone. And it could be that the car becomes like this, but then you think more about sharing car, because the cost of the car obviously is much higher than a phone. But if you think about sharing a car, and in one day there is a new car with better features, as a user, so wow, that's fantastic, I want to sign for it. I think there might be, I don't know all the knowledge, but I think there might be adoption rates that will be different from region. That's more related to how you see the car as a device or as a house or something like that.
Yeah, if I may add, I think that it will definitely be cultural, but I also think that it will be generational. Hugo, you mentioned that your kids are not likely to want to drive. I think my granddaughter is not even going to be offered the opportunity to get a driver's license. So I think that original cultures, generations will influence all of these design and supply chain decisions. I also think that the regulatory environment in different regions of the world is quite different, and further segmentation and proliferation of what we call mobility today and transportation are also likely to embrace digital fabrication probably more readily in unmanned first mile, last mile type of transportation devices, you know, both land and aerial, as well as newcomers into the space that will leverage these skateboards to create new utilities. So I think that all of that at the end of the day bodes well for end-to-end digitization. And then when you layer on top of it also the incredible sustainability potential that emanates out of all of it, and then closing the loop with Gary's data that tells us in real time whether or not what we're designing and making is performing as expected, I think creates tremendous opportunity here to innovate and disrupt.
Yeah.
Right. And then when we're looking at the current times, obviously 2020 has kind of thrown a wrench in the works for the ramp up for how things have been looking for these digitization adoption activities. We have a question: how will COVID impact time and resources spent on additive manufacturing? Will manufacturers be able to recover and afford new experimentations after working at limited capacities? And how will consumers be affected?
Yeah,
Avi, what are you?
my sense is that the initial inclination of most companies is to you know, press hard on the brakes and reassess all of their investments and R&D spendings and cash out, because in periods like this, it's kind of the survival instinct. And after you do that, depending on who you are and where you fit in the ecosystem, you begin to think of what kind of runway you have and what kind of a recovery shape we're going to have. And that goes into the calculus of every company, large or small, and that largely determines, you know, how one allocates resources to preservation versus growth and opportunity. When you get past that, then typically what we've seen in previous recessionary periods is that smart companies understand that this is a time to reinvent themselves and their value proposition, and to innovate and push on R&D even harder, because they have a higher likelihood of emerging on the other side, you know, with a larger addressable market. And in instances like this, I think you ultimately are judged not by how much cash you have left in the tank, but what you did with it during such a period. And so if history can inform us here, we're likely to see more and more initiatives in the second half and in the first half of next year around R&D and innovation and compressed cycles, and also around dealing with things like supply chain agility, because I think some of these topics are going to be foremost on every CEO's agenda.
I'll just add one. I think that if you see a lot of the pain a lot of the companies are suffering right now, it's related to the supply chain challenge they're facing, the ability to design, redesign products much faster than they do, the ability to design for costs or design for sustainability. And I think if the way I see a trend, like Avi says, obviously there's a storm now. You need to get out of the storm in the best possible shape. But I think the action number one will see what are the tools that are available to me if something like this happen again, or if I'm not prepared again, because I don't want to suffer that again. And I see I will give an example unrelated to the automotive, but the example serves the purpose, is the medical industry that traditionally is also very slow on product development and product realization and design. And they are suffering dramatically now because there are no ventilators, you need to design a new one. And then suddenly they become super open. I cannot share the name of the company because of NDA, but we got involved ourselves in a very traditional company, kind of like to walk them through how to design something digitally. And they were surprised that it usually takes them a year to do something, and they did in a few weeks. And we start to help them through the local supply chain network, how they can build a prototype and get something running in another week, which is something they never did before. And if you think about any industry that is suffering right now, if you want to recover fast, so think about automotive, if you want to speed up the adoption of electrical cars, if you want to reduce the weight in your car, because that will be an advantage for you in the future, you better hurry up and get those tools available and learn how to use the tools and actually work together with all the ecosystem, because more people using the tools, and I think there is a cost effect on the scaling up that will help everyone. And I think that's something that I think everybody's thinking right now. What are the tools? And I think 3D printing has become at the top of the list of everyone's mind because of the speed of reaction, the speed of changing design, the speed of product concept to realization. I do think that that it will be a faster adoption, and I think a mindset shift towards digital tools, including 3D printing, when the storm is over, actually.
I think during challenging times, great companies actually use that to become even stronger. And just as an example, Volkswagen, have faced major problems because they haven't been able to sell the cars. In a lockdown period, you can't go and buy a car. You can't go and experience and go to a dealership and discuss it. So that's been a huge problem. But they've actually done a couple of things during this period. They're not waiting. They've redesigned a lot of the manufacturing process. I don't mean just digitization, but they've learned from the pandemic. I don't think you'll see the manufacturing environment go back to what it was before the pandemic. There's social distancing and how people behave and practice within the manufacturing facility has been implemented. But they've also diverted massive amounts of R&D funds into their new electric car brand, which is called ID. And it's a huge shift for a company like Volkswagen, and it's going to hit the market in September time. And then one other big investment they've made, which I think links back to the point about being manufacturing, supply chain and logistics, is that they've now become a majority shareholder in a Chinese auto company, an auto manufacturer, which traditionally were joint ventures, because China right now is actually their largest market globally. So they haven't waited for the end of the pandemic. They've made those moves right in the middle of it. I'm just using that as an example.
And that was an excellent example, and I can see we're just about at an hour right now. So I'd like to ask our panelists if you have any final thoughts on this very broad, very deep topic of automotive supply chain and digital transformation before we start to really wrap things up. Hugo, why don't we start with you for any final thoughts?
Well, first of all, I want to thank all the panelists and yourself and the team who organized that. I also want to thank everyone who joined, and I hope that everybody stay health and safety. And I really hope that we are getting out of this as quick as possible so we can come back to our normal lives and enable more and more applications with digital tools. For me, my final message is that I don't know who is in the panel today, but I would really encourage all of you that are involved in automotive, that are trying to change the industry, to encourage our colleagues to really look into digital tools and to try to experience and learn more about what is possible, and use some of the cases that are popping up everywhere, like ventilators, like masks or swabs. You'll be very surprised to see the costs and speed. And what I call costs, not only the cost per part, but the total cost involved. I would encourage you to learn more about those cases. And we have some of them. I'll be more than happy to share. We'll be publishing some cases later this year. But I really encourage you to understand that and see the power of design, the power that this can do in the change, and the use of digital tools. It's really an invitation to learn more, open up your mind, and try to understand some of the pain points you had during COVID, because some of those pain points can probably be solved by the use of digital tools and additive manufacturing.
Thank you, Hugo. Jerry, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
I'd just like to say a thank you, because you were very generous to invite me to participate in this. Given that I don't have any real experience with 3D printing, but I've really learned a lot from this whole process. We're very focused on digitization in the automotive sector, but we're more in the world of the data and the connectivity. But I've certainly learned the important link between what we do and using a technology like 3D printing in our discussion today and in our discussion the other day in preparation for this. So thank you again for inviting me on behalf of Kubik Telecom. And like what Hugo said, I don't think we go back to a normal like we knew before, because I think we've all learned the power of remote working, and not everybody has to go into a headquarters building. We've learned the power of Zoom and Teams and video. So I think we will go back to normality, but it'll be a different normality. And please, everybody, I wish you health and safety.
Thank you so much. And Avi, your final thoughts today.
Well, first, my gratitude, Hugo, to you and to Jerry. I feel that we've only just begun to scratch the surface of the possibilities in front of us. And thank you, Sara, for doing an incredible job moderating and herding us. And thank you, everybody who keeps on joining us for all of these discussions. It takes a community of like-minded people to impact changes. We have an incredible catalyst in COVID. What we do with it is entirely up to us, and to what extent we embrace digitization and virtualization, not just into our interactions, but into the material world that we live in, will determine, how better off humanity is going to be as a result of this very, very painful pandemic. And I think that what differentiates us collectively and globally is that in times like this, the best of us gets revealed, and that's our resourcefulness, industriousness, and inventiveness. And so I'm very optimistic about the future, and I'm reminded that nobody can do this alone. So this is a good time to find all these uncommon partners and collaborators that can become a force multiplier in this kind of transformation. So thank you, everybody, again, and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, Avi. And one last thing to let all of you know about is that the next Nexa3D webinar is next Thursday, June 25th, at the same time we were here today. That's 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 10:30 a.m. Pacific. There's a link to the webinar in the chat right now to register for the 3D Printing Leadership Forum, the Future of the Automotive Industry, Challenges and Opportunities. And that again is next Thursday. It will be discussing the future of the automotive industry and its challenges and opportunities. We've seen disrupted supply chains, declining sales, and reduced R&D due to COVID-19, so it's a pivotal moment right now. At the same time, there is a future with more electric vehicles on the road and autonomous vehicles. This webinar will get into how we bridge the gap from the current economic crisis to the future. We hope you can join us next Thursday, June 25th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, 10:30 a.m. Pacific, and you can register right now in the link in the chat right there. And thank you so much to our fabulous panel for your insights today. Thank you, Avi and the team at Nexa3D. Thank you, Hugo and the team at DSM. Thank you, Jerry and the team at Kubik Telecom. Thank you to all of the attendees joining us today and for all of you who contributed questions to add to the conversation. A recording of this webinar will be available soon. Thanks so much for joining us today. And again, to echo everyone else, stay healthy, stay safe. We really appreciate you joining us today. Have a wonderful day and hope to see you again.